Tonight, a failed assassin of Bumpy Johnson becomes his closest ally. How did fate rewrite their story?
Harlem, New York, 3:17 p.m., Thursday, May 14, 1953. The air was thick with the tang of car exhaust and the sweet, acrid smoke of burning trash from the corner bins. Men in wide-brimmed fedoras leaned against parked Cadillacs, watching the slow crawl of pedestrians beneath the oppressive heat of a sun that had no mercy. The streets hummed with the usual tension of the post-war underworld, but today, an invisible wire of danger buzzed through every cracked pavement and graffiti-stained wall. Inside a narrow brownstone on 125th Street, a man named Johnny Knuckles Marino, known for his brash arrogance and empty threats, paced the floor of a dimly lit parlor. He was dressed in a pinstripe suit too tight across the shoulders, his hair slicked with a sheen that betrayed obsession more than style. In his hand, a pistol heavy enough to remind him he had control, or at least he believed he did. Outside, the chatter of children playing stickball could not mask the sense of impending doom. Marino had made a mistake, a fatal one. He had openly mocked the man who for nearly 2 decades had commanded the shadows of Harlem with a reputation that made mobsters rethink every handshake, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. The insult came at a social gathering, a taunt aimed at Bumpy's mother, a line of words coated in contempt and racial venom. "You're nothing but a street nigger," Marino sneered, laughing as others nodded, emboldened by his audacity. The humiliation was public, the disrespect was meticulous, and the clock had begun its silent countdown. Bumpy, seated in a corner of the room, remained statuesque. His face betrayed nothing. No twitch, no flinch, no shout. Just eyes, cold, calculating, like shards of obsidian reflecting the world's stupidity. He did not move. He did not threaten. He simply stared, letting the silence hang heavier than the humid afternoon air. That stare was an ultimatum, clear and unambiguous. The consequences for such insolence would be precise, brutal, and unforgettable. 6 hours and 43 minutes later, Marino would realize that power was not the weight of the gun he carried. It was the network Bumpy commanded, the respect he enforced, and the intelligence with which he executed vengeance. Fingers would be broken, debts would be called in, and an ice-cold lesson would be delivered without the hint of chaos. Marino's life would pivot from arrogance to dependence, from hunter to companion, forced into a bond forged in survival and fear. The story of how Johnny Marino lost everything is a warning that history has tried to hide. If you enjoy these deep dives into the underworld, you can support the channel by buying me a coffee using the link in the description. Your support keeps these investigations alive. Now, let's go back to May 14, 1953. Harlem, 1953. The streets were a living organism, pulsing with jazz, cigarette smoke, and the low hum of ambition. Sidewalks rattled under the heels of men who knew every alley, every stoop, every shadow where a wrong glance could end a life. Brownstones lined the avenues like sentinels, their brick faces scarred by time and neglect, while neon signs flickered above bars and gambling dens, casting a jaundiced glow over a world that operated outside the law but still demanded order. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson moved through this chaos like a ghost with authority. He was a paradox, a criminal by label, a protector by reputation. Children crossed the street when he passed, not out of fear of violence, but respect for the system he enforced. Business owners whispered his name like a prayer or a warning. You disrespected the community, and Bumpy's response was inevitable, precise, and brutal. It was in this world that Johnny Knuckles Marino made his fatal error. Marino was everything Bumpy was not: loud, careless, arrogant, and full of misplaced confidence. He swaggered through Harlem with a pinstripe suit tighter than his sense of strategy, his hair slicked with pomade that caught the afternoon sun like a warning flare. He thought respect was given. He thought intimidation came with the weight of a gun. He thought Bumpy Johnson, for all his reputation, could be laughed at. The stage for the insult was a social gathering in a modest parlor on 125th Street. The room was thick with smoke, a blend of cigars and cheap whiskey that clung to the walls and lungs alike. Men in fedoras lounged on threadbare sofas, trading gossip and wagers in hushed tones. Marino, with his gun tucked loosely in his waistband, chose this moment to test the untestable. "Your mother?" "Nothing but a street nigger," Marino spat, his voice cutting through the chatter like a razor. Laughter followed, uncertain, nervously loud, echoing off the cracked plaster. The insult was deliberate, designed to humiliate, to provoke. It was racial, personal, and public, the kind of venom that demanded retribution. Marino didn't just attack Bumpy, he attacked the entire system Bumpy represented. The respect, the discipline, the unspoken rules of survival in Harlem. Bumpy sat in the corner, leaning back against the wall, his fedora tilted slightly over his eyes. He did not rise. He did not shout. He did not even blink. There was only the stare, cold, immovable, a calculation that stripped Marino of confidence. Silence became the loudest sound in the room. Every tick of the wall clock marked a second closer to consequences. Marino could not yet comprehend. This was Bumpy's strength, the ability to make men confront their own vulnerability, to feel the weight of a storm before it struck. Outside, the afternoon sun had begun to dip, casting elongated shadows across the streets. In Harlem, the whisper network already carried news of the insult. It traveled faster than the gossip in the parlor, reaching every stoop, every barber shop, every candy store where children watched the adults they idolized. Bumpy's name was not just feared, it was understood as a promise, systematic, inevitable, and absolute. Marino left the gathering convinced of his cleverness, unaware that each step was a march toward a reckoning. For Bumpy, the insult was not just an affront, it was an invitation, a chance to demonstrate the discipline, precision, and brutality that underpinned his authority. Within hours, Marino's world would begin to unravel, not with chaos but with purpose, planned, measured, and irreversible. The first chapter of this story closes with Marino walking into the fading light of 125th Street, unaware that the shadow following him is not just Bumpy Johnson. It is the weight of a man who enforces respect with precision, and whose vengeance, once begun, cannot be stopped. Key cliffhanger, Marino believes he has survived, but Harlem and Bumpy have already drawn the map of his downfall. Every ally, every business connection, every ounce of pride will be tested in the hours to come. Harlem, 5:42 p.m., May 14th, 1953. The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the brownstones in a jaundiced light, but the streets were far from quiet. Shopkeepers closed shutters a second early. Children were called indoors, and the usual hum of conversation carried an undercurrent of tension that only those who knew Bumpy Johnson could sense. Inside his modest office on Lenox Avenue, Bumpy sat behind a scarred wooden desk, a ledger open in front of him, though his mind was far from accounting. This was a man who had been underestimated, mocked, and insulted one too many times. Johnny Knuckles Marino had made the cardinal mistake, publicly humiliating Bumpy and attacking the honor of his family. That insult wasn't just words, it was a declaration of war. Bumpy did not reach for a gun. He did not yell or storm out into the street. Instead, he pulled a blank sheet of paper from the drawer and placed it in front of him. He would make Marino understand that fear could be delivered systematically, efficiently, and without a single wasted motion. The first note, written in precise, block letters, read simply, "Respect is earned. Disrespect will be repaid." It would be left somewhere Marino would see it, but not today. Timing, Bumpy knew, was everything. The first step in the plan was intelligence. Bumpy's eyes scanned the ledger, but his mind scanned Marino's world. Who owed him money? Who would betray him first if pressure was applied? Which doors could be closed with a whisper and which required the subtle application of force? Every ally Marino had was mapped, categorized, and given a value, leverage. Within hours, Bumpy had created a silent network of threats and opportunities, each designed to destabilize Marino before a single confrontation occurred. By 7:16 p.m., the first consequences began. Marino arrived at his office to find a shipment of illegal goods confiscated or simply vanished. Business partners who had once nodded at his bravado suddenly hesitated in meetings. Whispers followed him down corridors. Clients canceled contracts without explanation. The humiliation was subtle but systematic. Every small loss chipped away at Marino's confidence, his reputation, and his sense of control. Meanwhile, Bumpy reinforced his psychological dominance. A single, measured visit to Marino's neighborhood sent a ripple through the community. Children stopped playing stickball, adults crossed the street. Bumpy did not speak, he simply walked, hat low, hands in pockets, eyes scanning. The silent warning was clear. Every step Marino took was under observation, every misstep catalogued. By 9:03 p.m., Marino's first real panic set in. Friends who had once offered protection now avoided him. He noticed the subtle signs, papers missing from his office, a slight delay in deliveries, the look of cautious fear in those who once obeyed his orders without question. Marino realized too late that Bumpy's power did not come from violence alone but from precision, systematic, calculated, and inevitable. And then came the first taste of physical intimidation. Marino received a small package left at his doorstep, his own brass knuckles, shattered and bent, with a note tucked inside. 2 options, humility or consequences. The first strike was symbolic, a demonstration of control, a promise of what would come. Bumpy's retaliation was never chaotic. It was a lesson, written in cold steel and careful timing. Key cliffhanger: Marino is beginning to understand that Bumpy Johnson is not a man to confront lightly. Every move, every decision, every ounce of arrogance will be measured and punished. By the end of this night, Marino will be forced to confront a terrifying reality. The man he mocked has already begun dismantling his world, one calculated step at a time. Harlem, 11:28 p.m., May 14, 1953. The streets were quieter now, but the tension was far from dissipated. Streetlights cast pale, fractured shadows across cracked pavement. The hum of distant traffic was interrupted only by the occasional bark of a stray dog or the sharp click of shoes against sidewalk stones. Somewhere, a jazz saxophone wailed, a mournful tune that seemed to echo the city's hidden dangers. Johnny Knuckles Marino sat alone in his office, nervously rolling a cigarette between trembling fingers. The day's events had left him rattled, though he refused to admit it. Subtle losses had become a gnawing pressure. Shipments gone, deals canceled, partners suddenly unavailable. A single shattered brass knuckle lay on his desk, a silent warning from Bumpy Johnson. Marino understood now that he had awakened something far larger than himself, something systematic, something inevitable. At 11:42 p.m., the first strike landed. Marino had stepped out to check on his car parked in the alley behind his building. He found the tires slashed, each one carefully cut with precision, the rims untouched but the message clear: mobility and control were privileges, not rights. A note was tucked under the windshield wiper: "You move when I allow it." The first physical imprint of Bumpy's calculated wrath had arrived, and Marino felt the first real sting of fear. By midnight, Bumpy's operation had begun in earnest. Using contacts throughout Harlem, he ensured Marino's closest allies began to question their loyalty. Confidential information leaked, contracts mysteriously dissolved, and whispers of betrayal moved faster than Marino could react. Every move he made now was under scrutiny. Every decision carried consequences he could no longer predict. The most defining moment of the night came at 12:37 a.m. when Bumpy himself appeared in Marino's office, a silent specter. He did not knock. He did not announce his presence. Marino turned, and there was the man who had been insulted, standing in the doorway like a shadow cast from marble. There was no rage in Bumpy's eyes, only the cold, methodical stare that had toppled so many before Marino. The strike was swift, precise, and brutal. Marino was forced to kneel as his fingers were bent back and broken one by one, carefully, with controlled force that minimized permanent damage but maximized humiliation. "This is your first lesson," a note later read. Left atop his desk, respect comes with understanding. Marino tasted the bitter metal tang of blood, his arrogance stripped in a few sharp, deliberate movements. By 2:03 a.m., the ripple effects were undeniable. Marino's street reputation faltered. Rumors spread of his humiliation. Clients and allies withdrew, unsure of where loyalty now lay. The balance of power had shifted. Bumpy's precision ensured that the lesson was public enough to enforce fear but controlled enough to maintain order in Harlem. The night ended with Marino alone, shaken to his core. He understood finally that Bumpy Johnson's strength was not brute force, it was strategy, patience, and timing. Every strike was calculated, every humiliation, public yet disciplined. Every step of Marino's unraveling was being orchestrated like a symphony of control. Key cliffhanger: Marino now faces a choice he cannot ignore. Submit fully to Bumpy Johnson and survive, or resist and risk total annihilation. The first strike has been delivered. The countdown toward total domination and an unexpected alliance has begun. Harlem, 8:15 a.m., May 15, 1953. The city was waking, but the streets carried the residue of the previous night's events. The early sunlight glinted off fire escapes, reflecting in puddles of rainwater that had not yet evaporated. Shopkeepers unlocked doors cautiously, glancing toward alleyways, whispers of fear still threading through the air. Johnny Knuckles Marino emerged from his building, careful, subdued, a man remade overnight. The night's lessons had left him rattled but alive. Broken fingers, sabotaged business, and the cold, surgical humiliation from Bumpy Johnson had stripped away the arrogance that had defined Marino. The first strike had been physical, but the true impact was psychological. The realization that Bumpy's power extended far beyond guns or fists. It was strategy, patience, and absolute control over every aspect of Harlem's underworld. By 10:03 a.m., Marino had received the first direct invitation into Bumpy's orbit, a summons, delivered with precision, not threat. Bumpy wanted to meet, not at a bar or gambling den, but in a neutral location that reinforced the hierarchy. Bumpy was in command. Marino, trembling yet compliant, obeyed. The meeting was silent at first. Words were measured, threats were implied rather than spoken. Bumpy's presence alone conveyed the consequences of further defiance. Within hours, the dynamics shifted. Bumpy offered Marino a simple ultimatum: submit, obey, and survive, or resist and face ruin. The choice was forced yet framed as an opportunity. Respect, after all, was the currency of this city, and Bumpy Johnson controlled the supply. Marino, faced with the remnants of his pride and the reality of his vulnerability, agreed. The transformation had begun, the hunter became a pawn. Bumpy immediately began integrating Marino into his operations, but carefully. He assigned minor tasks first, each designed to test loyalty, observe decision-making under pressure, and enforce discipline. Marino was forced to witness the consequences of betrayal firsthand. Associates who had once flaunted independence were publicly humiliated, their reputations dismantled like fragile glass. The lesson was clear: obedience was survival. By 3:46 p.m., Marino had performed his first act of allegiance. Bumpy sent him to recover a shipment from a rival who had overstepped the bounds of respect. Marino executed the task efficiently, but with visible hesitation, Bumpy observed silently, his stare never leaving Marino's back. The act was symbolic. Marino was now participating in the system that had once been his enemy, experiencing firsthand the precision of Bumpy's control, the cold efficiency of his retaliation, and the inevitability of consequence. The psychological transformation was not immediate, but it was thorough. Marino began to internalize the hierarchy. Bumpy's word was law. Respect, once earned through arrogance and threats, was now purchased through obedience and fear. He learned that survival demanded humility, vigilance, and strategic thinking, lessons delivered without chaos, but with exacting precision. By nightfall, Marino's new reality was undeniable. His former bravado had been replaced with cautious respect, his network of allies reoriented toward Bumpy's authority. He was a friend born of fear, a subordinate forged in humiliation, a man whose survival depended entirely on his ability to follow orders. Key cliffhanger. Marino is no longer a threat, but he is far from fully trusted. The city watches silently. The next test of loyalty will determine whether Marino becomes a genuine ally or collapses under the weight of his past arrogance. Harlem itself holds its breath, knowing that the most dangerous transformations are those that occur quietly, behind closed doors, under the cold gaze of Bumpy Johnson. Harlem, 2:11 p.m., May 16, 1953. The streets buzzed with life, but the air carried a new kind of tension, a quiet, disciplined fear. Shopkeepers spoke in hushed tones. Children lingered on stoops, glancing at passing men in fedoras, noting the subtle shifts in posture and gaze. The neighborhood had been reordered. Every block, every alley, every whisper carried the unmistakable signature of Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson's authority. Johnny Knuckles Marino had now become a fully integrated part of Bumpy's operation. The transformation was complete in the eyes of the street, from arrogant enemy to disciplined subordinate. Marino moved through Harlem cautiously, executing instructions with precision, aware that even minor errors would carry consequences. Yet beneath the fear, there was respect forming, not for friendship, but for the system that Bumpy enforced. Bumpy's consolidation of power was methodical. At 3:37 p.m., a rival gambler, emboldened by Marino's former reputation, attempted to reassert control over a corner operation. Bumpy intervened with calculated force. The rival's cash flow was frozen, shipments intercepted, and his public reputation dismantled. A note was left on the doorstep: "Order is restored." Respect costs nothing, but arrogance is expensive. The message was clear. Power was not taken by gunfire alone. It was maintained through strategic disruption and humiliation. Marino, once the target of Bumpy's wrath, was now the instrument. He supervised recoveries, enforced collections, and executed minor intimidations under Bumpy's watchful eye. Each task reinforced the lessons he had learned. Obedience ensured survival. Precision maintained control. Humiliation instilled order. Bumpy's smart violence became Marino's new code. Physical brutality was reserved for those who challenged the system, while financial ruin and public embarrassment disciplined the rest. By 6:02 p.m., the network of Harlem's underworld had realigned. Allies who had once questioned Marino's authority now deferred to him when he moved under Bumpy's guidance. Rivals who had mocked the previous day now understood the cost of disrespect. The city itself had adapted. Bumpy's reach was omnipresent. Every street corner, every speakeasy, every handshake carried the invisible weight of his oversight. The partnership between Bumpy and Marino was now functional, but not without tension. Marino's past arrogance lingered in the shadows, occasionally surfacing in subtle defiance or hesitation. Bumpy, always observant, allowed these moments, calculating whether they would strengthen loyalty or necessitate further discipline. Each test was a reminder respect was not voluntary. It was enforced, maintained, and exacted with precision. By 10:19 p.m., Harlem had become a microcosm of Bumpy's philosophy: order through fear, loyalty through consequence, and power through systematic control. Marino walked the streets like a changed man, a living testament to the efficacy of Bumpy's methods. Together, they maintained a delicate balance between dominance and fear, ensuring the neighborhood remained under their watchful gaze. Key cliffhanger: as Harlem settled into this uneasy equilibrium, a new, unforeseen threat began to surface. A rival syndicate with ambitions that could challenge even Bumpy's meticulously constructed authority. The next moves would test Marino's loyalty, Bumpy's patience, and the stability of their hard-won dominance. The calm was temporary, and the storm was approaching. Harlem, 11:47 a.m., May 17, 1953. The city moved with a rhythm all its own, a pulse that spoke of survival, respect, and silent hierarchies. Children ran between brownstones, their laughter a fragile counterpoint to the omnipresent tension in the streets. Shopkeepers conducted business as usual, yet every action, every glance, carried the weight of observation. Harlem had not changed in structure, but its balance of power had been rewritten, indelibly, by Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Johnny Knuckles Marino walked through the streets with a new gait. His arrogance had been stripped away, fear, discipline, and a begrudging respect had taken its place. He was no longer an enemy nor fully a friend. He was a product of Bumpy's calculated authority. Every action he now took reinforced the order Bumpy had established. Every word he spoke in the underworld echoed the cautionary tale of the man he had once sought to humiliate. Bumpy's consolidation of Harlem was complete. Rivals had either been neutralized, bought, or humbled. Public humiliation and financial ruin had worked alongside measured physical intimidation to maintain obedience without chaos. The notes, the timestamps, the strategic strikes, all part of a system that communicated one immutable truth: disrespect carries consequences. Those who observed from the periphery understood that allegiance to Bumpy was survival. Defiance was a calculated path to ruin. By 2:15 p.m., Bumpy and Marino convened in a quiet back room of a Harlem speakeasy. Marino now served not just as an ally, but as an enforcer of Bumpy's philosophy. Together, they coordinated operations, handled disputes, and maintained the fragile equilibrium of the streets. Every interaction was a lesson for the underworld. Power could be maintained with precision, fear could be a tool, and respect could be enforced without unnecessary chaos. The streets whispered of this new order. Tales of Marino's transformation circulated alongside rumors of Bumpy's calculated strikes. Those who had once been defiant now spoke cautiously, recognizing the invisible chains that bound them. Bumpy's reputation was not merely that of a criminal. He was a protector of a system, a guardian of respect, and an architect of controlled consequence. By 5:42 p.m., the true legacy of the events was evident. Marino had survived, but survival came at the cost of independence. His friendship with Bumpy was forged not in loyalty alone, but in the crucible of fear and respect. Harlem itself had adapted, its social and criminal hierarchies now firmly aligned under Bumpy's watchful gaze. The city had learned the rules, and the cost of ignoring them. Key cliffhanger. The story closes with a reflection on the moral ambiguity of power. Bumpy Johnson's methods were precise, efficient, and brutally effective, but they came at a cost. Marino had been saved, yet transformed into a pawn. Harlem had been stabilized, yet under a regime built on fear. History would remember the friendship, but rarely acknowledge the calculated cruelty that forged it. In the end, respect had been enforced, obedience secured, and a legend quietly solidified. One act of systematic vengeance at a time,